Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Armageddon Game, which is episode 13 of season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the second season episode, Armageddon Game. So Armageddon Game is the episode in which Bashir and O'Brien go to this planet where there was two warring species who has been warring with each other for years. However, they made peace, and they have this biological weapon called harvesters that they want destroyed, and they're having a hard time destroying it, so they ask the Federation for help. So Bashir manages to crack the code, and they manage to destroy all of the the biological weapon, the harvesters, and they celebrate, but then a group of Kellorans come in and murder everyone. O'Brien and Bashir just barely manage to escape, and they run away to a planet in hiding in the hopes of contacting the Talani to warn them that the Kellorans had broke the treaty. Meanwhile, the Kellorans and the Talani go to Cisco and Deep Space Nine and lie and tell them that Bashir and O'Brien are dead and that everyone died because O'Brien accidentally triggered a warning security system that vaporized everyone. Pretty soon, Keiko doesn't believe this. She thinks that the footage that they're shown of O'Brien and Bashir's death has been doctored because it shows O'Brien drinking coffee in the afternoon, and he never drinks coffee in the afternoon because that will cause him to stay up too late. So Cisco and Dax go to retrieve the other runabout from the Kellorans and Talani, and they investigate this, and they do find out when Dax beams aboard the other runabout, finds out that it's been tampered with, that there are 5 seconds that have been deleted from the logs in which O'Brien called for a transport. So they find out that they're lying, and meanwhile, O'Brien and Bashir share stories and, personal stuff about their personal lives. And then O'Brien, of course, is dying from the being infected by the harvester. And they're trying to contact the Talani. They succeed. However, when the Talani show up, the Kellorans are with them, and they find out that they're both in on it, and it was their intention to kill everyone with any knowledge of the harvesters, including them. And so they're about to kill them, but then Cisco finds them and beams them on board. However, the Kellorans and Talani outgun Cisco in this dunky little runabout, and so they demand that Cisco turn over O'Brien and Bashir to be killed. Otherwise, they'll just destroy the runabout and kill them all. Cisco refuses to do so and uses the runabout to attack the Kellorans, and they're surprised by it, and so they simply destroy the runabout. However, unbeknownst to them, Cisco and the others had beamed aboard the other runabout and warped away, and were used that other runabout that they pilot remotely to attack them as a distraction, and it worked. And so the Kellorans Talani are like, oh, well, maybe they were killed. I don't know. They know for a fact that they weren't killed, but I think they're going to try to just lie and say that they were and say that's good enough. But regardless, O'Brien makes it back just in the nick of time. His life is saved, and he and Bashir sort of bonded a bit more, but he's actually just happy to be back with his wife. And when his wife tells him about the fact that she knew that it was doctored because he never drinks coffee in the afternoon, he says, but I always have coffee in the afternoon. Which is what I say about this episode. It's so. To me, this is one of those episodes that I always forget exist. And when someone brings up the title, I'm like, whoa, so what happened in that again? It's the one, I know it has O'Brien and Bashir hanging out with these funky people with weird hairdos. But what actually happens in this episode? It's like one of those really forgettable episodes that's neither good or bad enough to be memorable. It's just like exists. And it's funny because this episode was chosen by Discovery to be referenced. There was a really deep cut. It seems like the later seasons of Discovery was trying to do a lot of these deep cuts, and they introduced a main character who would become Burnham's first officer for the 5th season, named Raynor. And he was from, I thought he was a Vulcan because he had the pointy ears or whatever, or Romulan maybe. But no, it turned out he was a Kelleran. Seen only in this episode, never referenced again. In fact, I was watching a review of this episode that was made before Discovery Season 5 came out. And they said, oh yeah, well, these aliens only show up in this one episode and never seen or heard of ever again. But they are. Well, they weren't for those people, to be fair, but they were referenced again in Discovery, which is such a weird deep cut. There could have been anyone. The Talani wasn't mentioned, but apparently in the future, all the way, the 32nd century, I think during the burn, the Breen invade the Kelleran's homeworld and occupy them and, strip them of their resources and brutalize them and stuff, almost like a Cardassian occupation type thing. But anywho, that's neither here nor there. I didn't recognize Raynor from Discovery as being a Kelleran because he didn't have a funky hairdo. And I said this, I'm like, when I found out, because I had to find out online by like reading articles and stuff, because the show itself doesn't tell you. Well, they mentioned the Kelleran, but how am I... I don't remember fucking Kelleran. As I said, I can barely remember this episode exists. And so I had to look it up and read some articles and be like, oh, it's the dudes with the funky hairdos from Armageddon Game. And I was like, well, I would never have known that Raynor from this species because they didn't give him a funky hairdo. They didn't give him like the beehive, like man bun or whatever the shit those people had. But I guess, in universe, you could say it's been 600, 800 years? Yeah, 800 years. So in 800 years, they changed their hairstyles and realized that those hairstyles look stupid. The Talani, which is the other alien, like all the males, I think look like Andy Dick to me. I don't know if it's particular who they cast or the hairstyles, but I always thought it was Andy Dick at first. It's like, did they get Andy Dick to play? But if you don't know who Andy Dick is, he's this comedian who apparently everyone hates for, I don't know, he's done some shady shit or something. But he was in news radio, which is where I mostly know him from, playing the quirky guy. I can't even remember his name, but he was actually he was really funny in that show. I love news radio. One of the most underrated, best sitcoms of the 90s, like right up there with Seinfeld in my humble. Although it was only good for like 2 years, though, to be fair. But I have it on DVD. I love that show. But anyway, but that's mainly I know him from. I think he's been in some other shit that people know him from more, which I don't know. Star Trek fans, if you're still not getting this, he actually was in Star Trek. Not this episode, but he was in the Voyager episode, Message in the Bottle, very overrated episode where he played the EMH Mark whatever it was, Mark 4 or whatever the hell it was, that teamed up with the Doctor to take over on the Romulans or whatever. So yeah, if you don't know him from anything else, you should know him from that. But yeah, anyway, it's again, all this is neither here nor there. It's just I always feel like those aliens look like Andy Dick to me. I don't know why. Anyway, so this episode was written by Morgan Gindel, the same gentleman who wrote The Inner Light, and one of the best episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, and he did an amazing job. It was a masterpiece, and he does lectures on that episode and talks about how that was one of his best accomplishments. You know what? I believe it, because all of his other scripts for Star Trek are really mediocre. He did this, he did The Passenger, and then he did Starship Mine, which were all sort of more action, suspense-based episodes, more of, rather than the drama. And the original idea for The Inner Light, I can't remember, but it was totally different, and I think it was more action-based, but then Michael Piller shaped it, and they made it more of a drama. And so he's, he talked, and I talked about him before when I covered The Inner Light, is that before he did Star Trek, he did a lot of, detective shows, Jake and the Fat Man, that kind of thing. And I think I was looking at some of his more recent credits. He worked on The 100 and stuff like that. So, in other words, nothing as good as The Inner Light. So, I think, well, I don't know. I didn't watch everything, so I wouldn't know. But it does seem like Inner Light was kind of a fluke, or at least Piller and what's his face? What's the dude's name? Peter Allen Fields. They probably helped shape that episode, but it was mostly Morgan Gindel who wrote it. To be fair to him, it was a him. But yeah, this script is very forgettable. As I said, very mediocre. And apparently, the original idea for this was very different. Well, at one stage it was supposed to be Dax and Bashir who were here, not O'Brien. I guess someone had the idea that to make it O'Brien because O'Brien must suffer. God, I hate that fucking cliche. This might be the first big one where they're starting to do that, becomes a trend. And of course they want, and this is it's probably Ira Stephen Bear, because he's the one, it was his condition for being the showrunner for Deep Space Nine, is that Bashir and O'Brien become like these big bromance, huge friendship pals. And this is the first episode that really starts to work towards that. Now, there's the storyteller in season 1, but that was just they end the episode with not really liking each other. This episode is when they actually start to form a bond. Like, the storyteller was the first time that sampled those two together and see what kind of chemistry they had and the comedy gold or whatever. But this is the first episode that they really actually in the universe start to build a friendship. But I'll get more on that. I'll get back to that later. So anyway, Morgan Gindel, his original idea had something to do with like an alien species using O'Brien to create this weapon of mass destruction, and it was in him, and they wanted to destroy it, but they couldn't destroy it without killing O'Brien, or something like that. I'm probably getting it wrong because I'm just relaying it secondhand, but something along those lines. I think this sounds much better. This kind of makes sense. And again, Michael Piller sort of came in and shaped it and said, oh, why don't we do it this way? Let's change this and do that. And so apparently Michael Piller told him to go write a epic chase episode. Like, I want a chase story. So he went and watched all these movies like Midnight Run or whatever they had to do, like chase and cat and mouse stuff, and wrote this epic script about cat and mouse where they're chasing each other throughout many like different starships, different planets. And he turned in the script and they went, this is way too fucking expensive. We can't make this. This is like way too expensive. Do it cheaper. And so, instead of a chase episode, Bashir and O'Brien spend the whole episode in the hut. So kind of the opposite of the chase. This is more of a hiding than a chase. There's just them hanging out in the hut while O'Brien is dying, and they're trying to get this transmitter operational. I think Ira Stephen Bear joked that it was a chase episode that takes place all in one location, where they're just hanging out in the one location. So it's not really a chase episode. And so, to be fair, it is kind of it does have time for character development. As I say, it's a key episode for O'Brien and Bashir, their friendship, and they have some great interactions. Bashir comparing the difference between how they react to marriage. Like, Bashir talks about how it was a really interesting story, and I think it's actually a shame they never followed up on this. It would have been interesting to actually meet this character that Bashir apparently fell in love with, and she was really beautiful, and she was crazy about him, and he was crazy about her, and she was like a ballerina, but he wanted to be in Starfleet instead, and she didn't want to stay on Earth, and so it didn't work out. But I was thinking that people do have families in Starfleet, like O'Brien. They just bring their family with them. But I don't know if he outright said it, but I think it's kind of implied that she wasn't on board with that. She didn't want to be a Starfleet wife. She didn't want to move on the starship. She wanted to stay on Earth to continue to be a ballerina. And I guess they couldn't work out. It's kind of similar to the whole Picard and Ella Darren thing. Is like, you can't work out long distance, because some, like Geordi's parents did that. Some families do that. They go where Starfleet sends them and just keep in touch. But I guess, I don't know, I guess it's the same situation where she just didn't want that. And I don't know if Bashir even asked her. He just assumed she didn't want that and just left her. But I don't think that's the case. I think it was kind of a mutual understanding, from what I gather from what Bashir said. But it was interesting getting that backstory and juxtaposing that to O'Brien, who did, as I said, get married and bring his wife out with them, and is juggling a Starfleet career and a family life at the same time. And Bashir is like, I'd rather be out adventuring. I'm a career man. I can't really be worried about a family. But he's saying that to O'Brien, someone who does have a family, is juggling both. And Bashir does point out, like, the pitfalls of that, and how, Keiko was very upset at having to move to Deep Space Nine, and it was, it made their marriage a bit turbulent, and of course O'Brien was very pissed off about it. It's like, what'd you say, when he brought it up, which is, again, because it's before these two were really friends, and so they're still kind of lukewarm on each other. But it's breaking that barrier, because later when O'Brien's dying, he's being a bit more open and actually, talking about it and not being so closed off and saying, you don't know what you're missing. Like, marriage is a great adventure, there's pitfalls and everything. And that is something I can relate to, and that I do agree more with O'Brien, that it is something worth keeping on to, and not just giving everything up for a career. And it's interesting having those two perspectives, and the two men, of course, relying on each other, because Bashir keeping O'Brien alive because he's dying, and O'Brien being the one with the skills to operate the communications device that could get them rescued. But as we find out later, it's actually not going to get them rescued. It's just going to lead the people who are trying to kill them right to them. But of course they didn't know that. But yeah, so that aspect of the episode is somewhat interesting. But I stand by that it's a forgettable episode, because even though should be memorable for being the episode that really first, starts to create the bond between these two characters, the main plot is really throwaway. These two aliens saying, who we never see before, never will again. Discovery Season 5 notwithstanding. Now, okay, we'll see them again like 3 decades later, and it takes place 800 years after this. But anyway, and they pretty much don't really resemble these aliens at all. But so essentially, we don't see them again. And so we don't care about these aliens. We don't really care about the war, and they're being silly by, let's kill everyone. Even these people in Starfleet who don't live like with us and don't live with our people, and they're going to go back to Starfleet and we'll never see them again. But they know our secrets, so we have to kill them. Like the Harvesters. To me, they don't get... See, I think if they made the Harvesters if they went into more detail about what's unique about this weapon, what makes it so dangerous, then maybe that would have made this make more sense. But it just seems like your stereotypical, normal biological weapon that any alien could create, that Starfleet could create. So why are they so we have to kill everyone who knows about this? Well, they could just go out and buy biological weapons from some other alien arms dealers. That's the flaw in this episode, I think. I think that if they wanted to make it, we have to kill everyone who knows about it, they need to make this thing more dangerous, more unique, more rare. It just seems like your stereotypical biological weapon. And by the way, O'Brien gets infected with it and it takes several days for him to die. So it doesn't seem, again, it seems like a normal fucking biological weapon. It's no big deal. So I don't really get why they're all gung-ho on killing everyone. Plus, I think it's really stupid. It's kind of like a James Bond type villain. Not really James Bond villain, but I'm trying to think of maybe cartoon villain. I don't know. It's like your cliche villain is we gotta kill everyone who knows about this, even though it makes no sense because the plot needs to happen, blah, blah, blah. And so it's a very forgettable. On top of that, it's another death fake out episode where because they lie and say O'Brien and Bashir's dead, and so the storyline we get on the station is everyone talking about these characters are dead and crying about them being dead and dealing with them being dead when we know they're not fucking dead because they're it's very clear. It's they did this in other episodes fucking was that one with Data the most toys. And yeah, it's a cliche that I don't really care for. Sometimes they can thread the needle and do it well, in the next phase, but this is not one of those times. I will say, though, about that whole storyline on the station, I did like the one scene when Sisko was showing the footage to all the senior officers, and it was really good. It was really good seeing the different characters and how they react to it differently. Odo's analyzing it and being very suspicious and treating it like an investigation. Kira is just angry, which again is in her character. The anger is just bubbling up on her. Dax is just being sympathetic and trying to help and trying to just comfort everyone in this time, and and they all handle it differently. And I also really like this scene because it shows how much these characters care about each other, how much they've grown into a family, because it's only the second season. It's only halfway through the second season, and so for the first season the characters were really kind of strangers, and they don't really know each other that well, especially making it clear that they just all meeting each other for the first time in the first episode. And so especially Kira is the one that impressed me because she is a Bajoran and this treated Starfleet like these outsiders. At first she didn't even want them there, and I think it really goes a long way to see her reaction to seeing Bashir and O'Brien die, and how much that affects her, and how she's ready to like fight and argue with the people who allowed this to happen, how angry she is over it, and how, you know, grieving she is. So I did like that. I think that was a really nice touch. And even Odo, you can tell that Odo is really affected by this as well. That he's like ready to investigate it or whatever, and being suspicious of it. And then later we get a scene in Quark's where we see Quark's reaction was supposed to be played off for humor. He was like, when he was doing a salute and to O'Brien and Bashir, and it says they were great customers, and good customers are something they're rare as Latinum, cherish them or whatever. And Kira at first was like, what like, is that all you gotta say? That, I mean, this is, of course, it's Quark honoring them in a Ferengi way, because that's how Ferengis see things. They'll see it through the lens of commerce, everything. But so in his own way, he was like honoring them. But it was nice seeing, you know, Dax and Kira share the drink, and Dax is talking about how Bashir gave her the his diary or something, and she never read it, and she felt guilty about it, and how sad it is, and how much she actually cared for him. That was nice. Like, that was good. But the overall story of, like, Keiko's reaction wasn't really, I don't know, didn't seem that powerful. It didn't seem like it could have been handled better, I think. And I get that she was kind of angry. She's like, I want to be alone. Just please leave me alone. Like, I get that, but it didn't seem like the reaction a wife would have to hearing that her husband just died. And then the whole thing about, he doesn't drink coffee in the afternoon, and that's the joke. You're like, what are you talking about? I always drink coffee. That was dumb. I think that was stupid. Like, that was cheap laugh. Like, the Quark thing was like a good laugh. This was a cheap laugh. Didn't work. I kind of didn't appreciate that. I thought that was kind of dumb. And yeah, the whole investigation. Did they really kill him? Is he really alive? Like, yeah, I didn't care. Like, it took too long. And even though I did like some of the character interaction with Bashir and O'Brien on the planet, the overall plot was so just cliche. It was so standard. It was so by the numbers. And that's why this episode's forgettable to me. It's not terrible. As I said, there's some good character moments. There's some good interactions. But the overall storyline is just so by the numbers. So forgettable. So who gives a shit about anything. So, yeah. That's where I stand with this episode. Forgettable to its core. So, I would now like to thank all of those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I want to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson, Brandon Neilhouse, and Antarius. Thank you all so very much for your very strong support. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Michelosio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, O'Brien must suffer due to bad hair exposure. LOL. Seriously, unlike the storyteller and especially Rivals, this is best remembered for being the episode that cements O'Brien and Bashir's friendship, and so the episode gets high points as well as Keiko, who thought she knew her husband, but her mistake made all the difference in the world. Obviously, this is the episode that first introduces the Antares, which right now, outside of Lower Decks, is the only Gamma Quadrant race that has continued in the franchise and Discovery, most notably the more stringent First Officer Raynor. Otherwise, interesting situation, but to get rid of the weapon, talk about dystopian tendency that either already has dealt with Dominion tactics to dispose of O'Brien and Bashir from the Federation so easily. It's not fantastic, though, the episode, so I hope it doesn't sound low when I give it 7 bad hair aliens out of 10. They're the Kelleran, right? That you're talking about? Maybe that's what you meant, because I just looked it up and it said Kelleran. But yeah, I got the Memory Alpha page. That's where what's his face, Raynor, was a part of. Anyway, and I read this comment about calling them a Gamma Quadrant race, and I was looking into this because I didn't think they were a Gamma Quadrant race. The main reason being is because the card game. I talk about this card game a lot, and they had these characters, the weird hair aliens, and when they have a character from the Gamma Quadrant, they have this little symbol, the Gamma symbol, on that card, meaning you can only play that card in the Gamma Quadrant. You can't play it in the Alpha Quadrant unless you have a special thing, like Jim Hadar have like birthing chambers or something that let you play them in the Alpha Quadrant, or there's the Alphas that were introduced in Season 6. Anyway, so according to this card game, these aliens were Alpha Quadrant aliens. But I looked it up online because I was curious. Maybe the card game is wrong. Because after watching this episode, it doesn't say. It doesn't specify whether it never says they're in the Gamma Quadrant. But that doesn't mean they're not in the Gamma Quadrant. So I looked it up online and I Googled it, and the AI answer for me was no. The Kelleran are not from the Gamma Quadrant. They're from the Alpha Quadrant. And they're their planet is somewhere near Bajor. But then there was a Reddit post. There was an article posted on the Reddit. I don't know where. Oh no, it was a Screen Rant article. So it was from Screen Rant. So it wasn't a generic Reddit user. And they say, "Oh, this alien that Raynor is from the Gamma Quadrant." So they say it's from the Gamma Quadrant. So it's unclear. I think they're Alpha Quadrant because they don't show them going through the wormhole. They never mention they're going to the Gamma Quadrant. I always assumed they were Alpha Quadrant because we know that sometimes the DS9 crew just hangs out in the Alpha Quadrant, like the next episode, Paradise. That's in the Alpha Quadrant. They're just doing missions in the Alpha Quadrant, so it's possible. I mean, I get the assumption that it was Gamma Quadrant because otherwise, why not send another Starfleet ship that's more equipped to handle this? And that gets into the whole thing of why DS9 have these dinky runabouts and not an actual ship or whatever armament. Like, yeah, in this episode they were outmatched and they had to use their wits to escape this alien because they had a dinky runabout. Why not give them a better fucking ship? But anyway, but it's possible it's just a planet near Bajor. And the other reason why I think it's in the Alpha Quadrant is because of the thing with the Breen occupying their world in Discovery, because that presumably happened during the burn. And during the burn, no one could hardly go anywhere, if I remember it correctly. Like, the space travel was rare, dilithium crystal was rare, and it was hard to do, and so, yeah, the Breen wouldn't go all the way to the Gamma Quadrant for it. But, anyway, I could be wrong, but I think they're an Alpha Quadrant species. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, the cylinders containing the harvesters are stored in a simple and open wall niche without any further safety measures. That's keeping in mind the poisonous contents, even more reckless than the way they store the barrels on the Enterprise. They treat the harvesters as if they are the worst weapon ever created, but compared to other biological weapons, they seem to be not so deadly. After all, since O'Brien is getting ill rather slowly, the virus or whatever it is not airborne, and O'Brien can be cured quite easily back on Deep Space Nine. I was really annoyed that we had to watch the crew reacting to the death of fellow officers who aren't really dead. Again, we already had plenty of this on TNG. I didn't understand why the Talani and the Coloran weren't able to scan for human life signs and thus find O'Brien and Bashir on the surface. The tactic to stay put in this place was just a lame excuse so they didn't need to build more sets. It was nice to see how the relationship between O'Brien and Bashir gradually improved, and the resolution that both races are working together was okay. My rating is a 5 out of 10. So you hit that nail right on the head. Yes, it was just a lame excuse to not build any sets. That is 100% correct. But it wouldn't have hurt them to just throw in a line about how O'Brien's setting up something that will block their scanners. That would not have hurt if they have done that. But anyway, yeah, I could not agree with you more about the weapon. It doesn't seem to be that big of a deal, but they're treating it like it's the biggest deal ever. And yeah, if it is such a big deal, why are they just keeping it on the wall? It is rather reckless. I totally agree. Anyway, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, I remember this episode being a lot better than it actually is. For some reason, I used to think of this as one of the better episodes of Season 2, and the last time I watched this episode, I remember thinking, boy, this is terrible. The ending is abrupt and doesn't make a lot of sense. If the aliens want to kill Bashir/O'Brien, what keeps them from just following the runabout or going back to the station? Or even just assassinating them next week. They're like, oh no, the runabout flew away. We'll never catch them or be able to find them again. They gave up too easily, but I think it was just lazy writing, not coming up with a more satisfying ending. I also thought a lot more action happened on the planet. I somehow misremembered Bashir and O'Brien like running and hiding from the aliens and there being some more fights or something. Nope, they just sit in the shed the whole time. The coffee gag is kind of silly. I think the idea of the plot is interesting and in principle, enemies coming together to destroy their weapons and wipe out anyone who has knowledge of them, but it was very poorly executed. I totally agree with you there, 100%. And, also, I agree about the ending being very disappointing, very sort of what's the word? Anticlimactic. That's the word I'm looking for. Because when Cisco came up with that cool tactic to outsmart them and use the runabout as a thing, that was really exciting. But then they were just like, oh, we saw them die, and the other one's like, did we? And they just end it there. Like, what? But how is that an ending? Like, I agree with you. Like, the Talani should be hiring assassins to try to kill Bashir and O'Brien. But it seems to me, I don't know, what I think is kind of somewhat implied by the ending, but it doesn't make it any more satisfying. But what I think is implied by it is that they're just going to lie to the other, to their people and be like, oh yeah, no, we definitely killed O'Brien and Bashir. We saw the runabout explode. Even though they didn't, they know for a fact that they got away. They'll just lie and tell everyone that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just making that up. Either way, I think it is very unsatisfying. I think, and plus on top of that, these aliens obviously had cordial relations with the Federation. There should be some fucking backlash for this, that they asked the Federation for help and then tried to assassinate the 2 officers they sent to help them. There should be consequences for this, and I would have loved to hear more about how Starfleet is like gonna read them the riot act and be like, what the fuck? You tried to kill our officers and then lied to us about it and said they died in an accident when they were actually still alive. Like, I would have liked to seen some consequences for that. So that's part of what makes this episode forgettable, is that there's no consequences for anything. It's like, why should I care? Just really. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy. He says, I like this episode mainly because as it was the start of Miles O'Brien and Julian Bashir's friendship. If we do remember the next time we see these 2 characters together, they are friendly, and maybe that isn't until season 3. Did these writers actually know what they did, making Miles O'Brien hating Julian Bashir? When I watched the show the first time around, as an Irishman hates an Englishman, I'm glad that they never mentioned this was the main reason Miles hated Julian. I know Alexander Siddig was born in Sudan, but his mother was from England and they moved to England when he was 2. I'm hoping this is the reason Ira Stephen Bear wanted to make these 2 friends, so they can kick this bad take on Irish and English people. I'm writing this the day after the USA election, and now I'm thinking, will the IRA take over Ireland? Oh, I mean, Sinn Féin, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. So my rating is 8. I remember when the Queen Mother came to Ireland and 3 gobshit shites that were shouting at her while her car drove by. This is what they said: "Get out of Ireland, you English cunt." I believe is the word, but that's more common for you American listeners who freaked out about that word. But anyway, and of course these idiots were wearing English football jerseys. Out of 10. Yeah, I'm not so much aware of the Ireland and English feud, never having been there myself. I've met a few people from England, a few people from Ireland. I've never heard anything personally about there being a feud, but knowing the political situation, that does make a degree of sense. And of course you're going to have gobshits, or gobshites, shouting shit. I mean, that seems common. There's idiots everywhere. But, I don't think that's why they got O'Brien and Bashir together, because the original idea for the Doctor was actually, he was called Amorous, and he was supposed to be, I believe, South American. He was supposed to be Hispanic, and it was their answer to finally having a Hispanic officer in Starfleet, which they actually, I don't think they ever solved this, as made a main character Hispanic until Strange New Worlds, I think was the first time. But anyway, that was the original idea, and Ira Stephen Bear, and I told this story before, he went to a baseball game with Michael Piller, and Michael Piller asked him to join the writing room for Deep Space Nine, and he would eventually take over as showrunner, and Ira Stephen Bear's condition on doing so was that Amorous and O'Brien become really good friends. So in other words, they thought of this friendship before the character was even English. At this stage he was South American or Hispanic. So it wasn't until so that makes me think it wasn't because of the English Irish. That wasn't why they made them friends. But if it's a side effect, then good. Then good. That works out well. Anyway, so, thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Armageddon Game out of 10 is going to be a 7. Very good. It's very good. Like, it's not bad. It's not a terrible episode, but it's just forgettable. Like, it's kind of typical. Oh, you know, it's not the shuttle crash cliche. I will give it that. But it is these main characters are dead when we know they're not dead cliche. And it's the two characters trapped in a situation and they're opening up to each other cliche. But there's some interesting character moments. As I said, it does start to build this great epic friendship that will become one of the pillars of the show. As you know, I forgot about rivals. I forget about that. The O'Brien Bashir thing, the whole racquetball bullshit. No, that's not really what started the friendship. It was here. And it wasn't the storyteller because they kind of hated each other in that one. So yeah, it is notable for that. And it was good for that. And some of the interactions, as I said, seeing how the crew have become a family because the way they react to Bashir and O'Brien's death was good character moments for the show overall as a whole. But it's just so forgettable. Like, these aliens are with the weird hairdos, like, I don't give a shit about them, and it doesn't really make any sense why they want to kill everyone just because it's a normal biological weapon that they could find anywhere in the galaxy easily, so what's the big fucking deal? I don't know. I think there's holes in the plot, and the plot wasn't really thought through. But there's good character moments, so it's okay. 7 out of 10. Anyway, that is it for my review of the Armageddon Game. So if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. All those sort of things helps me in algorithms. Very much appreciate. And if you are so inclined, no pressure, if you really, really liked what I'm doing and you want to support me financially, you can consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. There's different rewards, different tiers. There's a Patreon-only series that I do of videos where I revisit reviews that I've already made. Exclusively for Patreon supporters, I release videos 2 weeks in advance, and you can make comments that I'll read on my videos like I just did. Stuff like that, so you can check me out in Patreon if you're interested. Otherwise, leaving a like, that sort of thing, always very helpful. Anyway, so let's see what's coming up next on the old channel here. Let's see where I'm at. So, Wednesday, I'll be over on Patreon doing one of those Patreon exclusive videos I was just talking about, revisiting my review for Lower Decks, the Next Generation episode. And then on Thursday, I'll be reviewing the show Lower Decks, Season 5, Episode 9. And then on Saturday, back over on Patreon for another revisit, this time revisiting my review for Whispers, one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes. So that would be great to revisit that one. And then on Monday, back on my main channel for another new review, this time reviewing the TNG episode, Thine Own Self. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation and Star Trek Lower Decks and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.